time, and I look forward to our session. I know some of you on the call may be individual artists and others may be representatives from arts organizations. I'm going to try to speak to both, but there are some differences. And at the end of the presentation, I'll give my contact information. So if there's anything you have, you want to talk about more, you have further questions, feel free to contact me anytime. I'm always available to speak to people interested in grants and nonprofit work. We'll also hopefully have some time at the end for questions as well. To advance my slides. This is a little bit about me, but Cheryl was kind enough to read off most of this, so we won't spend a lot of time on that. I will say that I've submitted over 350 grant applications and proposals. See that last number there? I neglected, I should have updated it. I gave Cheryl the update, but it's actually over 10 million in grants. And the reason it's so much more is because two of the recent grants I worked on were federal grants, which are big grants. One was 4.5 million and one was 1.9 million. So I always like this slide. It's a foolproof formula for writing grant applications. Laughing out loud, of course, this means it's not, there is no such thing, and you have to look at each one individually. Some are more complicated than others, but the most important thing, if you forget anything else but this, the most important thing I find with grant applications is reading carefully and following instructions very carefully, because you can have a great proposal, but if you miss something, you can automatically get disqualified. Okay, so a little bit about grants. It's very competitive. I'm sure that's no surprise to everyone. The 20% rule means that about 20% of applications get funded for most people in the grants field. So it's a numbers game to get 2 grant applications that you have to submit. I should have checked my math ahead of time. But, so if you submit 10, 20% would be 2. If you submit 20, you're hopefully going to get 4. But that's also if you're really targeting well. If you're not targeting, that would be a lower percentage. It's an investment of time. Grants can be very time consuming. Sometimes it takes me just an hour or more to read through the guidelines of a particular grant. And also it can take me up to upwards of 10 hours on any one grant application. So, and you have to give yourself plenty of lead time to gather all the data and attachments that are typically part of the grants process. Grants awards can be very prestigious, so that's nice if you get one. If you're an artist or in an arts organization, that leads to my next point, which is that it can help you get more grants. Grants beget grants. I think they're easier to receive, a little bit easier to receive more if you've already received one, because it increases your credibility. And it shows that other people or other funders besides the one you're going for will be funding you. Grants are not just for full-time professional artists or art school graduates. If you fit the eligibility guidelines and you're just an artist, not full-time or a professional student, you can still apply. So it's important to know that. And if you don't ask, you definitely won't get. So you have to apply. Of course, that seems obvious, but it's true. It's a mantra in fundraising in general. You don't get if you don't ask. Okay, the types of grants that are out there. Project and program is among the most popular type of grants that funders want to fund, and that's for accomplishing a concrete project or goal. For instance, for artists that might be taking an exhibit on the road, and that a funder would help cover transportation and related costs, but wouldn't necessarily cover your studio space if you're going on the road. Project and program costs. Program grants don't normally want to cover operating costs, your general operating costs. That said, there are some operating grants out there. I find that they're few and far between, unfortunately, and operating grants can support any expenses. Capital grants refer to expenses that are long living type expenses, such as buildings, major equipment like vehicles and computers. Capacity building grants refer to reaching a larger audience. If you're trying to fund like capacity building and you write a grant saying that this money will help me reach a larger audience, that usually would fit with capacity building. Fellowships refer to short-term professional or work opportunities, usually at higher ed institutions, and artist residencies require an artist to spend time away from their usual environment and obligations. Residencies often provide studio space, meals, housing, and travel and living stipends. And some of you may already be familiar with that. Okay, this is the process of grant writing. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this particular slide because we're going to go through all of this in the slides coming up. But you can see generally that you have to determine what you want the money for, develop some tools for tracking, applying for grants, doing the research of the funders, preparing, submitting proposals, and then if you get grants, managing the award and cultivating, stewarding your funder. And we'll talk about all of this going forward. Okay, first, determining your needs. As I mentioned just on a slide previous to this one, programs and projects tend to be what's most attractive to funders. So think about what projects are on your priority list if you're an organization or an individual artist. The 5 W's. Who is your intended audience for the work? Is it youth? Is it seniors? Is it general public? Start thinking about these and taking some notes about this. But when you go forward, you'll have some notes already to apply for grants, sort of a boilerplate of information. What exactly are we creating? Are you producing a play? Are you creating a sculpture? So that's the what. The when. When will the project or program occur and over what time period? Is this a 1 month, a 6 month, a year, or longer? Where will your project take place, geographically speaking? And the why. What do you hope that your project will accomplish? What are you doing with your work? How do you hope it affects your audience? Include numbers, meaning if you're talking about performances, how many performances? How many workshops if you're doing educational art workshops? Are you hoping to create one piece or more? How big of an audience are you looking to impact? Funders definitely like to hear a story, but they also want numbers. Data is very helpful in grant proposals. Show me the costs. Think about how much you'll need to run the full program from soup to nuts. And we're going to talk about this a little bit more in the presentation. I'll give you more detail on creating a budget. Okay, then you're going to develop your grant tools. And I'm going to go through these 4 tools. Everyone should have a copy of these slides, but if you want anything in a bigger format, please let me know and I can email to you after the fact. This is just an Excel spreadsheet. There's other types of spreadsheets with other tools, but I'm just show you what I use and I find very helpful. This is how I created mine. You feel free to copy it since I'm putting it out there. And when I'm looking at funders that I'm researching for my different clients, this is what I do. I put in as much information as possible: the foundation name, the location, the date I researched it, the name of the foundation, website, contact information, and notes. This tool has been really helpful for me with my long-term clients. I have one client that I've researched over 1,000 foundations, and sometimes someone will send me, information on a foundation. My first thing I do is look and see if I already looked at them, so I'm not duplicating my work. Even if I have researched them, sometimes I'll look again just to see if anything changed. But I find this a very useful tool. Also, another Excel tool is my grant submitted tracker. So the first one I just showed you, just every foundation or funding source that I've researched. This one is when I actually start submitting grants. I want to know who I submitted to, the date I sent, what did I request, what it was for, when I was notified, and lots of other details that are relevant for organizations usually, but maybe if you're an individual artist as well. And you could also tailor this, of course, to what makes sense for you. A grants calendar, and this is if you're submitting grants regularly, I would keep a calendar so you know which month you're submitting to which foundation. So in 2022, if you submit to a particular foundation in January and you want to go to them again in 2023, you know that you can go to them again in January. You don't because it's usually about a year. You want to submit to different foundations no more than once a year and around the same time. So this calendar has been helpful for me to track that. Also, if you find a foundation and it's January and you can't submit till November, that's another way you can use this tool to see and look when deadlines are coming up. This is what I call a depot doc, and it's a huge time saver for me. I mentioned earlier, start taking notes on the 5 W's, the who, what, where, when, why. You can create a document such as this for yourself. If you're in an organization, you would need a tax ID number, for instance, and you have that right at the top so you don't have to keep looking for it. If you're an individual, there might be other things that you would include on here. But this has been very helpful to me with my different clients because it's hard to remember everything about every certainly every client, but even if you're in an organization, you might not remember everything off the top of your head. It's a great tool to just always go to for information. Okay, now we've developed our tools, we're going to start doing some research and tracking in those tools. Research and target your funding sources, and you do that by looking at your geographic location, the population you're going to serve. For instance, I said earlier, as an example, children or adolescents or seniors or general public, the type of grant and the interest. So when you're looking at different databases or funding sources, obviously you're going to go for ones that are related to art. Maybe you're a visual artist, so you would want to be more specific, or maybe you're in dance or theater. You could start by really narrowing down your terms. Goals of funders, and what I mean about that is when you find funders, you also want to make sure that you're strategic. You want to be submitting for and looking for projects and funders that that you meet their interests. So it's not about necessarily what you want to get funded, but is what they're interested in funding, does that mesh or fit with what your project? That's very important. Read the funder's website. Only about 10% of all United States foundations and corporate grant makers actually have websites, but if a funder does have one, read everything on it. See which other agencies they funded, if they're listed, often they are, and for how much. I find that to be very helpful, because sometimes you want to submit a grant and you're not sure what range they submit in. If it says on their website the other organizations they funded and the amounts, that's very helpful. You can apply to multiple foundations at once, and I think funders expect this, because if you have a project and you don't know if a funder is going to fund it, of course, you're going to submit to multiple sources, and you should. I mean, it's a great problem if you get funding from more than one for the same project. You can work, they will work with you on that if that happens. Call to build a relationship if you can. Not all funders have access, phone numbers or information where you can access them, but if they do, I absolutely urge you to call them first. Take notes, write out a little script if you want, because it has saved me so much time at calling funders for several to tell me, oh, we're not accepting grant proposals right now, or I'll tell them about what I'm looking for, and they'll say that's not really in our wheelhouse right now, even though the research I found may have said that. It's really important to call them if you can. It's going to save you a lot of time. If you do get someone on the phone, confirm the spelling of their name and address if they are interested in seeing your proposal. Don't be shy about calling. It's their job to answer questions. You can even ask them if they look at the proposal first. I haven't found anyone who would do that, but you never know. Types of funders. There's private foundations. There's many, many private foundations. Those are a lot of those are family foundations or community foundations. There's also the big foundations like Hearst or Lilly Endowment, usually coming originally from corporate foundations. Some of the bigger ones were originally from corporations, but then are now by themselves as their own foundations. And of course, corporations have foundations, a lot of them, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Johnson & Johnson. Those are huge examples, but you should look in your geographic area. And Rockland, unfortunately, we don't have too many huge corporations like that, but there are some in Westchester and certainly New York City. And even if you're a Rockland artist, if you're working in New York, perhaps they would be interested in funding you. Then there's the public funding, which is publicly funded arts agencies, and as an example, may give out grants, and government, federal, state, and local. I do see a question in the chat box. The question is, if we call the funders, what are the best questions to ask? I can actually, Lisa, hi Lisa, I can actually give you a little script if you email me after the fact. I have a script and I'm happy to share it, but typically I'll say, I say who I am, what agency I'm calling from, and I say, I have a project that I think fits with what you're looking to fund based on the information I have about you as a funder. Would you be willing to hear about it to see if I was accurate? That's the main thing. And then also, like I did mention earlier, just confirming who to send the proposal to, confirming the information. If they have a website, I do recommend, like I said, you look at that first before you're calling. Sometimes if they have a website and then you call, they'll say, oh, just look at our website. But my recommendation is say, yes, I did look at your website, but if you wouldn't mind speaking for a few minutes.
Say when they come back.
It would be helpful. I hope that was helpful. But again, you can email me privately if you want to have I can send a little bit of a script if you'd like. Okay, how do you find the funders? So there's many resources for finding funders. I used Candid's Foundation Directory online a lot, and this is the most used source from what I understand from people in the grants game. You can, this is just a slide of what it looks like, the website, for specifically when you go to search for grants. So I'm not going to show lots of slides on this, but you can certainly look yourselves. It's Candid Foundation Directory online. You can purchase a subscription. There is a fee. You can do it monthly or annually, or you can go to the Suffolk Library and use it for free there. So that's a great perk. Other libraries, I think Westchester County, 2 Westchester County libraries have it for free as well. I'm not sure which ones, but I know Suffering does. I subscribe right for myself now, but before I was a consultant, for instance, Meals on Wheels, we didn't want to pay for the subscription. So I'd go there every so often to do some research, or sometimes call the librarians and they would help me if I just had like one thing I wanted to look up. There are many other sources. There's no single available source that has everything. And a little tip about Foundation Directory Online or any other source, sometimes it can be outdated. So if there is a number listed on the foundation, remember, call and check. Because sometimes the address or information Foundation Directory Online or other sources has can be outdated. You can download a profile on the foundation and shows you who they fund and what amounts, not specifics necessarily who they fund, but in general, like they fund education or healthcare or the arts. You can see the graph of the average size awards, and use parameters to filter what you're looking for. Because sometimes if you're very general, if you just say arts, you might get 3,000 hits. It's a lot. It would take so long to go through 3,000. So you really want to narrow it down, say New York. I wouldn't say just Rockland County because you might not get anything, just New York, maybe New York geographic area. Try to filter as best that you can. Just play around with it and you'll see. You can also search for non-cash grants as well. What I mean by that is pro bono consulting or in-kind items. And there is a box that if you want to include US federal funds, if you want to look for that, you can click that as well. But there are other sources for federal funds that I will mention later. Also, you can use additional filters and take out those foundations that are not accepting unsolicited proposals. Unfortunately, a lot of foundations don't. They just give directly to organizations that they are aware of. But, and I'll talk about this later. Usually if it says no unsolicited proposals accepted, I move on. But there have been cases where I have considered those. Sometimes they'll let you, they don't want an unsolicited proposal, but they might accept a letter of intent, which I'll talk about later as well. So again, this is really a brief overview. So if you have any questions, I'll try to answer them, but you can always call me afterwards to speak more about it. I do see a few questions in the box. I'll take a look. Beth says, are the grants submitted electronically or hard copy? That's a great question, Beth, and it's both. I prefer electronically. It's much easier, of course, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But some foundations, the small family ones, hard copy. They don't even have a website or presence, so you do have to submit, and they don't give you a lot of information on the foundation profile. You just usually submit a letter with your 501c3 form of your organization, or whatever information you think is pertinent. Also, does NEA fund projects these days? I assume that another search tool is grants. Yes, grants.gov is a search tool. I will get to that. NEA, I believe they do, but I haven't looked recently for NEA.
Okay. Maddie, just before you move on to the next slide, I just wanted to share that little known fact that ACOR has a subscription to the Foundation Directory Online. And if you are a member, I will gladly, we can make an appointment and we can do the research together, or we can talk about it and we can do a little bit of a search for any of our members. So little known fact, but
that is great.
Take advantage of it.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That is really great to know. What a nice benefit. Like I said, that's the tool that I tend to use the most. And from what I understand, most grant writers and researchers use extensively as well. Okay, so you're going to now your research, and I talked a little bit about that some grants only available to perhaps to artists in certain geographic locations, maybe working in certain creative disciplines or mediums, or even hold certain identities. So maybe just female artists, maybe if you have a disability, there's a particular grant, or if you're a veteran, an immigrant, it could be anything. Race. use as many parameters as possible. And the nice thing with Foundation Directory Online, it gives you like a drop down of the different ones. So you don't have to guess. And as I meant, try searching on multiple terms. I've done that before. So you're searching on art, and then maybe you want to do visual art specifically as an example, or art exhibits, just to see what comes up. All right, how do I find more funders? I talked a lot about the Foundation Directory Online. We also have the grantstation.com. You can subscribe to the Grant Station Insider. It's a little newsletter. It's at least weekly, maybe more. The week of September 17th, in fact, I subscribed. I saw 2 arts-related opportunities on there. I'm going to show you one later. It's actually passed already because it was in September. It was a VIA Art Fund for Visual Artists and the Schubert Foundation for Theater and Dance. Both of those were in the grantstation.com Grant Station Insider newsletter. So it's free. I don't, except for Foundation Directory Online, I don't think I'm paying for anything right now. I think I do all free ones. Okay. Social media, follow art-related groups. Like I'm in a grants group, and that's been helpful to me to get information. Sometimes I see opportunities there. Google's a great search tool as well. I mentioned artworkarchive.com. I found the complete guide to 2020 artist grants opportunities there. So just by Googling. Subscribe to various newsletters. I mentioned the Grant Station Insider from grantstation.com. There's also Candid, which is a company that gives you the Foundation Directory Online, also has Philanthropy News Digest, and I do get that regularly. So that gives some opportunity as well. You can research for your specific art and medium related newsletters with Candid as well. So that's a really nice little perk there. I don't think you have to have a subscription either. So take a look at Candid's Philanthropy News Digest, where you can specify what kind of grant you're looking for. So you're not getting every grant for every type of project that you wouldn't be interested in. I also found Creative Capital and Words of Mouth by Googling. So those are sources you might want to check out. I'm not endorsing any of these. Of course, I'm just mentioning lots of them. I did say that I use Foundation Directory Online and grantstation.com. So obviously I'm still using those. So even though I'm not saying I endorse it, those are ones that I continue to use regularly. I just wanted to give you an example of the e-newsletter. This is, I subscribe to New York State Assembly Grants Action News also. So that's for government, New York State grants. There was one where an $86,000 a year stipend is provided. It was in September, and it's through the Princeton Arts Fellowship. But it was in the New York State Assembly's Grants Action News. That's also a free newsletter. I think that's monthly. So it's not too overwhelming. How do I find still more funders? Looking at different museums, galleries, professional art associations, community service organizations like Junior Leagues or Lions or Rotary. If you have any connections to any of those, you may want to check with them. Sometimes they're very specific about what they fund, but you never know. I believe the Lions does a lot with visual impairment, for instance. But I would just always be talking about your opportunity to everyone you meet, and you never know what you would find. Also different heritage groups. So if they may not be particularly arts related, but if you are particular heritage, there might be a group that's interested in funding you just because you meet those eligibility requirements. Okay, I'm sorry. I think I went. Sample budget. I'm going to keep going. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I did want to put this here. Just to give you an idea of a budget, and I'll talk about this more later. This is, you put down your project. This is like a performance I gave as an example, like a theater type, and this is just an example. And I thought of the number of things that would be involved with a performance, and I'm sure there's more. I am not a performer myself, and you see the total cost is $32,500, but I'm not asking for the full amount. So that is something that I recommend, that you never ask for the full amount of the grant, the budget. Usually funders don't want to fund everything. So you think about what you absolutely need and what you can maybe do without. Like maybe you don't need equipment because you already have that equipment. but you're showing that it's still part of your budget. It's still something that you'll be using. Performance venue, maybe it's 5,000, but you don't need it because maybe they're giving it to you in kind. So these are ways that you can show a full budget, but you're not necessarily asking for the full amount. Okay, and we'll go back to some budgets as well, more budgeting later. Who is funding similar work? That's also, I would look at websites of similar arts organization to yours, or artists. They may say that they were funded by a particular funder. And that is not unusual for people to do. I do that all the time for my clients. So if my client is a college, a local college, I look at the other local colleges and see who's funding them, see if I can find out, because often funders are interested in funding the same types of organizations and the same types of art work. Social media, as I said, join some social media groups related to your medium, and you might find some opportunities there. Networking, which I also mentioned earlier, this ACOR, for instance, is a great networking organization. People are very kind and will often share their sources with you. Not always, but often they will too. Or the board or the staff or the volunteers may know of something and will share with you. You want to get a piece of that pie. Okay, some more resources still, and you have all the slides. So, but the CD publications, there are topic-specific newsletters. I believe you have to pay for those, but I just want to mention there are some paying things that you can look at as well that may be of interest. You can just do search for grant writing information and sample proposals right into Google or other search engines, and you will get lots of information. The internet, there's some negatives about the internet certainly, but there's some positives, and one of the positives, the amount of information that people share, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Grantadvisor.org, Chronicle of Philanthropy, which has a publication, Grant Gopher, Grant Siren, grantwriters.net, and GuideStar.org. Again, I'm not endorsing any of these. They're just different sources that I've come across over the years. GuideStar gives you a listing of all the 990s in the nation, and you can search for their 990, all the nonprofit organizations in the nation, I believe, that submit a 990, which is a federal IRS tax form that nonprofits are required to submit, right? Cheryl, ACOR submits one? Good, of course you do. So you can get a lot of good information on the 990, and you can get them for free. They're public information if you go to GuideStar.org, and it will tell you about the funder, give you an address, a phone number. Again, they might not be accurate. Sometimes it's the accountant's. I found that a lot. It's the accountant's phone number, but they may then refer you to the actual phone number of someone who works for the foundation or who is a board member of the foundation. But I'm going to show you my next slide that shows you something really cool about a 990. It shows you, not always, but a lot of them will show you who they have given their money to. So if they don't have a website, this is, you can see here, the New York Junior Tennis League gives out money, and this is who they gave out their money to this particular year. This is just a few of them. There might be even a bigger list to this, but it tells you the amount of the grant and the purpose. So this is such great information because it really helps you determine if you are. So I love using the 990, and I look at them all the time to get information because I think I might have a foundation that's a fit, but then I look at it and I see really who they're funding, and I think it's not really going to be worth my time to submit to them. Hard to tell sometimes, but it will help you narrow it down. Okay, I mentioned this earlier. What if you find foundations that say unsolicited proposals not accepted when you're doing your research, and you find this a lot? First, let's say, do you have any connections? I look at the names of the board members or if there's any paid staff, and I will see if I know of anyone or if someone I know knows someone. So if it's my client, I'll send it to my client and I'll ask all of their board members to look. Because you never know. If you know someone, then you might be able to, you'll have a connection. Someone can call them and say, I became aware of this foundation, you're on the board. I see that unsolicited proposals are not accepted generally, but if we have, is that something that you would consider since, we have an actual connection? And they may ask you a little bit more about their project and say, yeah, that is something we would consider. That does happen sometimes. Attend any events. If you have a particular foundation that you think is a really great fit great fit, but you can't directly apply. If they have events, go to them. I mean, this is not usual for small family foundations, but for some of the other foundations, or if their board members go to events and you're aware of that, try to connect with them at other events. You can also try sending a letter of intent, which I'll describe a little bit more later, or calling them. But if it's explicitly discouraged on the website, like don't call them, then certainly don't. Oops. Working through a fiscal sponsor, I want to mention this. Some nonprofit arts organizations may be willing to serve as your fiscal sponsor if you're an individual artist. Because it is hard to get grants on your own as an individual artist, of course. And this designation allows artists to apply for grants and solicit tax-deductible charitable contributions under the sponsoring organization's exempt status. So I found this organization doing a little bit of research called Fractured Atlas. I don't know if anyone's heard of them, but they look for artists to be fiscal sponsors for. But there is a caveat. You must fundraise at least $1,000 for your project before applying to them as a fiscal sponsor and applying for grants. That organization, Fractured Atlas, also shares monthly grant opportunities, so it's a good website to look at. And this slide tells you a little bit about what the advantages to having a fiscal sponsor are. Lends credibility to your project, receives and acknowledges charitable contributions, retains control and discretion over the funds, so you have to have a really clear relationship with them. They are really technically the ones getting the funds and then giving them to you as the artist. Requests records and reports to fulfill oversight responsibilities and communicates regularly. So there's some nice advantages to that. It's something to consider. Also, by the way, so artists, but also nonprofit organizations that don't yet have their 501c3s, like newer nonprofits, can also consider this as well. Okay, so you've done your research. Now we're going to start thinking about preparing our submission. As I said earlier, if you don't remember anything else but this, follow the rules and guidelines, read your directions carefully if there are directions available. They may ask you to use a specific font size, specific spacing, margins, font type, and page count, especially with federal grants, which I'll mention later. That's very important. Pay close attention to the detail. If you're using like a boilerplate document, which I definitely recommend because you don't want to keep reinventing work, just make sure if you've applied to one foundation and then you're going to use that same boilerplate for the next foundation that you just read it carefully when you change the foundation name in every place, and tailor it to each foundation. Online versus mailing. I know this was mentioned earlier. I think Beth mentioned it. For online applications, what I always do is I type everything in a Word document first. I do the headers and I do everything in Word, because when you're working online, sometimes sometimes some online applications you can't even save. You have to go in, submit the whole thing and send. So if you need time to think about it and work on it, that's difficult. So I like to do everything, and I copy the questions into a Word document and I do my answers there. Also, it helps with checking character and word counts. You know, it's hard to do that sometimes while you're in the document, but in the Word doc, you can do it. For mailing or attachments with online applications, you use the exact same header titles on the application. So if they say annual budget, when you submit it, say annual budget if you can, rather than just budget. Just try to be as specific as possible and correlate with their titles. If you are mailing, number the pages for their ease. Use the language of the funders. This is really important. So as I said, if you have the information on a website, use their language. So I'm working with an organization now, and they support middle and high school students with tutoring and all different kinds of supports. And they don't normally refer to themselves as an after-school program, but what they do is after school. So there's one foundation that I found that likes to support after-school work. So I use that terminology, even though the organization I work with it's not typically how they refer to themselves. They felt comfortable using that. And you want it to match with what the funder is looking for. It just makes perfect sense. You know, when they're reading it, they hear after school, ding, that, okay, that's good. That's what we like to fund. So use that language and relate it back to their priorities. Of course, if it fits. If it doesn't fit, you know, you're not going to do that. Keep it simple. Avoid academic or abstract phrasing and jargon, especially, you know, in a specific field like arts. There might be terms that the average person might not be familiar with, and you don't know who's reading it. They may not be artists themselves, even if they're funding arts organizations and individual artists. Funders need concrete descriptions. and avoid superlatives like the best or the most in your writing if possible. Include photos or videos if allowed. That's great with your work, for your work with arts submissions. I imagine that sometimes it's actually required. If it's not and they allow it, certainly do it, but just make sure, again, you read the guidelines, they may say only submit, proposal, no extraneous information. And allow for the time, the lead time we talked about earlier when we first were speaking this evening, but also what I mean for allow for the time is you want to try not to submit on the last day if you're online. If the deadline is December 1st, you certainly can submit to December 1st. And believe me, I've done it many times submitting on the deadline, but I try not to, because if you have any technical difficulties and you have no one to, if they don't have someone there that you can speak to, you're going to run into some problems. So I had this with one funder, I remember I could not submit on their site and they let me just email it to them, which was great, but it was before the deadline. So that was very helpful. Oops, sorry. Okay. Now I'm going to go over some common proposal sections. So certain funders will tell you this is what they want and they'll outline exactly the sections, others won't. So if you're just submitting a general proposal to a foundation and they don't give you specific things that they're looking for, these are some of the things that I would suggest you use. A cover letter or cover email, including the project, the name of the project or a description of the project and the amount you're requesting and your contact information. An artist statement or artist background, a little bit about yourself, if you're an individual artist, a project title and description of your project. And in that description, tell them what's special about your project. How does it, and again, how does it meet the funder needs? Again, always go back to their needs. Tell the story behind what it is and what's really unique to you or your organization. Portfolio or work sample, if it's allowed, or if they don't say, then certainly submit it. And if you can, I always like to submit specific goals that are SMART goals, meaning specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time sensitive. We could talk about this more offline if anyone's interested. I think this is one of the most difficult things to do. A lot of people, will write a goal, but it ends up being very general. So we're looking for specifics. Like, I'm not going to give an art example right now off the top of my head, but I will say something like, we're looking to hold 4 educational workshops for seniors on nutrition, where 25, and this doesn't have to be one goal, this could be sort of broken out, but I'm getting very specific. So I'm saying 4, see there's my quantitative 4 workshops throughout the year with a goal of 25 different individuals attending at each workshop, where at the end of the workshop, 80% of the attendees say that they have increased their knowledge about good nutrition habits. That's just a very, general, simple example, but my point is there, you see them using numbers and trying to be as quantitative as possible. So it's not just, there's 2 parts there. It's just the number of things that you're doing, the 4 workshops and the number of people you want to attend, but also what they're learning. So that's very important if possible. So with your art projects, maybe there's something that you want to get across to your audience. How are you going to measure that? It might be difficult, but maybe not. Maybe there's a survey you could do. Again, this is, I could probably do a whole workshop, I'm sure I could, on just setting goals and objectives. This is a general overview. And again, you can feel free to contact me if you need more information. Collaboration, if you're collaborating with anyone, please include that in your application. A lot of funders love to see that and even ask for it. And sustainability, how will you maintain the project or program once the funding goes away? If it's a short-term project, that's your answer. It's a short-term project. I'm doing it for 1 year and then moving on to another project. But if it's something you're trying to maintain, you have to think about how you might want to sustain that. I have information on that. I could also share about how you can perhaps answer that. I'm not going to get that specific right at this moment because we only have an hour. Oh, there's a question here. Oh, what does SMART stand for again? Sure. Specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time sensitive. If you Google it, you'll also find that, but there's some different versions of it. That's my favorite one, to be specific, to make it measurable, achievable, realistic, you don't want it to be. So the 4 workshops with 100 participants of the year, if 100 is reasonable, then say that's great. But if Don't say 500 just to impress them if it's not reasonable. And time sensitive would mean within 1 year. You're saying, you know, when is your project going to end? Okay. Right to win, a few tips on writing. So use short paragraphs, 2 to 3 sentences and short sentences. Use lots of white space. Don't use acronyms without spelling them out first. Use grammar and spell check. Easy to read font if you can, if they don't require a certain font. I like to use bullets, bolds, and underlines to bring the reader's eye to important points, and proofread. Certainly proofread yourself, but even better if you can have someone else who's not an artist or even in the arts world proofread it, even better, because there might be a non-artist reading your proposal, so you want to make sure they understand. Edit as much as you can, cut out unnecessary words. The more succinct you can be, the better. If they don't give you a page limit, 3 to 5, if possible, I would recommend at the most. Okay, I mentioned I'm going to speak about letters of inquiry. So that's when some foundations say, don't submit a full proposal, but you can submit a letter of inquiry. Limit it to 2 pages, even 1 if you can. Some say just 1 page. And you basically can just give a little intro to your project, what you want to accomplish, the amount you're requesting, and your contact information. Photos of your work if applicable. You just say, this is what I want to do. This is how much I'm asking for. Again, you would say your time frame, where you're going to do it, sort of those 5 W's if you can. Okay, build your budget. I had a budget slide earlier. Let me see if I have it again. I don't see. You know what? I think I have had a little bit of misnumbering here. So hopefully some of you remember that budget, but you have the printout so you can look at it. Here's a list of some different categories for a basic budget. For really, it could apply to almost lots of different projects, not just arts. But I tried to make it a little bit arts oriented. Make sure, and here's some things I'm going to tell you about the budget. It's very important because it shows funders if you have a realistic grasp of your project scope. Make sure your research prices, don't just estimate. I mean, you can estimate, but research them. Don't guess. Use averages is really, you know, I wouldn't use the lowest price, but I wouldn't use the highest price if you're seeing different prices for different things on the internet. The $1 million question about a budget, we looked at this a little bit earlier, you know, how much do you want to ask for? And my answer is, well, don't ask for the entire project budget. Funders really prefer not to, unless they say they will, but sometimes the government will do that, fund the entire thing. But a lot of private funders want to only fund a portion of it. They don't want to feel like they're your only hope. But it depends on how much you need. So come up with a realistic budget and then look for, well, what can I maybe get donated, or what can someone else provide, or what could be in kind, or what do I already have? Show the full project, or, you know, maybe you're already paying for space, so you can include that in your full budget, but you're not going to ask the funder for that. But don't be afraid to go big if the funder does big funding, certainly, and has a track record of larger grants. Again, I mentioned this earlier, look at the average grant size of the other organizations that are funded on the 990 if you can find that. Also, very important, make sure there are no surprises in the budget, meaning if you list something in your budget, like website development, for example, make sure it's referred to in your project narrative. You know, if you're asking for funding for a website, it should be referred to when you're writing about your project as well. And some funders ask for what's called a budget narrative. So not that Excel document I showed you as an example of a budget, that's your budget, but they might ask for a 1 or 2 page description of those expenses, like how you came up with that $5,000 for the website, for instance, as an example. I'm just making that up. And it might just be, I got 3 estimates and this was the average price in your narrative. Usually those narratives are required for government grants. I don't see too many with private foundation grants, but I have seen some. Okay, congratulations. You received a grant. A grant is a contract to carry out a specific agreed upon work. So don't overpromise in your proposal. Make sure you can do what you say you will do, because you might actually get that grant. We joked about this with one of my clients. Yay, we got the grant. And then a few days later, ooh, we got the grant. You know, it's very exciting. You want to do it, but it is a lot of work, of course. Submit any reports that are required on time. If you're having trouble meeting any goals, call them. They'll work with you often. Document your conversation with your funder. Also, a lot of foundations don't require reports, but if you can, send it anyway. I think that's good stewardship and cultivating them for when you want to send your next proposal. The grant writer or development professional, if you're working with an organization or whoever submitted the proposal, is expected to help write and submit any report so they can help you. And also you have to, if you're an organization, you have to follow up with the staff that are implementing the grant to make sure they're doing what they need to do. For small organizations, often if you're doing grant writing, you're expected to be the one to like follow up to make sure it's being implemented. Even if you're not the one implementing, I've had that many times at small organizations, or like they're not implementing as fast. Now I'm sort of there to help expedite that, to make sure that they're getting on this, because we want to report back to the funder. How you manage your grant may affect, of course, whether you're refunded. If you don't receive the full grant amount, you can go to the funder to readjust the budget and program, but please be prepared. So if you're asking for 50,000, you might only get 20, and you're still expected to do something with that 20, maybe not the full project, but something. So just be aware of that. Think about if you only got some of the funding, could you still go ahead with your project and meet your goals? Detailed communication with funders in an individual record in the database. If you're an organization, you have a database and you put your funder in the database, make those notes in there. If you're just an individual artist, just handwrite or type out the conversation that you had. It's important to keep good records and documents. If you do get a grant, maybe you want to get a binder and keep everything in that binder. You also want to cultivate and steward your funders. If you submit a grant proposal, it's a great idea to follow up and see if they received their proposal, and you can follow up with the decision if you haven't heard from them. If there's contact information to do that, there isn't always. Send a thank you letter either way. Even if you don't get funded immediately, keep funding sources on your mailing list if you're on an organization, or even if you're an individual artist where you have your own email blast list, certainly keep funders on there. Invite them to events if you have any. Send photos and testimony. If you're funded, certainly they would love to see photos and testimonials from anyone that you're helping, perhaps, or audience members. Provide publicity for them. If you have a website, thank them on your website or in your newsletter, press release, social media. Nominate them for an award. Funders love that. And follow them on social media as well. Okay, what about reapplying? What if you didn't receive the grant? If you don't get a grant, I always try to ask for feedback. There's usually they say, we just had so many great applications and they don't want to give feedback, but sometimes you can get a little bit of feedback that might help for the next time on how you can strengthen your proposal. Some organizations, you can get a copy of the reviewer's comments. Not common, more common for federal grants than private foundation grants, but you can certainly ask. And cost benefit analysis, what I mean by that is how long did it take you to submit? If it's a very, very lengthy proposal and all you're getting is $1,000, is it really worth your time? It may be, but it may not be. So I always track how much time I'm working on a specific application, and I encourage all of you to do that. So you really have a good idea of how much time it's taking. And then what I mean by 3 denials and done means I will submit to a foundation for a specific client or project 3 times, 3 years in a row. And then if I don't get it after 3 years, that's it. I'm not submitting again. I just feel it did get one client, or not a client, when I worked for Meals on Wheels, one foundation where I did get it on the 3rd time. So that has happened. But after that, 3 is that's just my personal rule. Others may have different rules. Okay, a few notes about government funding. I'm not very familiar with government funding and individual artists here, but I will be very general about government funding. Often there's like a short lead time. There'll be a public announcement and you'll have maybe 2 months at the most to submit an application, but then there could be a long lead time to get the funds with government funding. That's true of private foundation funding too sometimes. You could submit and not hear for 6 months or more. Federal grant applications are very detailed and time consuming. I would say that I've spent over 100 hours on individual federal grant applications of my time, and usually I work with a team. So you're talking upwards of 200 hours on a federal grant application sometimes. And that is not even just the writing. A lot of it's the project, like developing, that includes all the meetings and developing your project, the thought into developing it. But then with a federal grant, there's a narrative, there's the budget, there's this budget narrative, all job descriptions sometimes, lots of different attachments. There's a lot that goes into a federal grant. Guidelines are usually consistent year to year. Once the federal government does put out a grant application, a lot of times they will continue it year after year. So you can look, if something comes out and you're like, oh, I can't apply for this in just 2 months, I don't have enough time, but you can think about it over the next year and start getting it ready for the following year, because likely it's going to be similar. No guarantees, but that is likely. Reviewers' comments are available on federal grants. If you do submit, you can see those and see how you did. It's very competitive, though, of course. I submitted one grant and we had no, it was all positive comments, no negative feedback at all, but we still didn't get it because, you know, there were so many submissions, and there were other submissions that scored, I guess, a little bit higher. We could have been, or we could have scored, you know, 1 point under the top, and there could be 5 organizations getting a grant, they all score 100, we got a 99, that's it, we're not getting it. So it's not a reflection on how good your proposal is, it's just very competitive. Also with federal government funding, a lot of times there's a drawdown, there's money in a system and then you draw down for the funding, but sometimes it's a voucher system. This is again for organizations. So for organizations, if you're applying for government funding, you have to be prepared to spend it and then get reimbursed. So for a small nonprofit, this might not be feasible. A few government funding resources, you have this in your printout, but I will mention elected officials. It's great to know who your elected officials are, and usually their office knows about a lot of different funding opportunities. And this is maybe for individuals as well, but certainly for nonprofit organizations, they are familiar with ways to avenues in government funding. So I would think about connecting with your elected officials or their offices at least. I think it's best mentioning grants.gov. That's how you apply for a lot of federal grants applications, right on the grants.gov website. I am familiar with that website. If anyone does want to apply for a federal grant and needs a little assistance there, I would be a good resource for that as well. My summary really is that, go for it, because there is money to pursue, and getting no is part of the process. Like I said, that 20% rule. So you're mostly hearing no. But eventually, if you submit enough and you hone your proposal and you find the right funders, you should be able to get some funding. It is, it's a process, it's an investment of time, but there is money out there. Thank you all so much. I hope that was, I hope I didn't speak too fast, and I know it was a lot of information, and we only had, have an hour, so it was just a very general overview, but I'd love to open it up for some questions. And we could, there's some in the chat, but also if you want to unmute yourself, that's fine with me. Thank you so much. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Great. So I'm just going to stop the recording.
Okay.